Sarah Martinez grew up in the dusty town of Cedar Ridge, Texas, where the horizon stretched endlessly and the sound of gunfire from the local shooting range was as common as church bells on Sunday morning. Her father, Miguel Martinez, ran a small auto repair shop that barely kept the family afloat, while her mother, Elena, worked double shifts at the local diner to make ends meet. Sarah was the youngest of 3 children, sandwiched between 2 older brothers who seemed destined for lives that would never take them beyond the county line. The Martinez family home sat on the edge of town, a modest 2-bedroom house with peeling paint and a front porch that sagged under the weight of too many Texas summers. Behind the house stretched 20 acres of scrubland that Miguel's grandfather had bought during the Depression, land that was too poor for farming but perfect for teaching his granddaughter how to shoot. Sarah's introduction to firearms came when she was 8 years old, standing barely 3 feet tall and struggling to hold her grandfather's old hunting rifle. Miguel had been skeptical about teaching his daughter to shoot, but Elena had insisted. In a town where self-reliance wasn't just a virtue but a necessity, she wanted her daughter to be able to protect herself. The first time Sarah pulled the trigger, the recoil knocked her flat on her back, but she got up laughing, her dark eyes bright with excitement. Within 6 months, Sarah could hit a tin can at 50 yards. By the time she turned 12, she was outshotting grown men at the local range and bringing home rabbits for dinner with single, clean shots that impressed even the most seasoned hunters in town. But it wasn't just her accuracy that set her apart, it was her composure. While other kids her age were fidgety and impatient, Sarah could lie motionless for hours, waiting for the perfect shot. Her high school years were marked by a strange duality. During the day, she was just another student at Cedar Ridge High, earning decent grades and keeping to herself. But after school and on weekends, she dominated every shooting competition within a 100-mile radius. Local gun shop owners started offering her sponsorship deals, and hunting magazines wanted to feature the teenage girl who could consistently hit targets that challenged Olympic marksmen. The attention made her uncomfortable. Sarah had never been one for crowds or cameras, preferring the solitude of the shooting range where the only sound was her own breathing and the distant echo of bullets finding their mark. She was tall for her age, nearly 6 feet by her 16th birthday, with the kind of lean build that seemed designed for the precise movements required in competitive shooting. Her instructors often commented on her unusual stillness, the way she could control her heartbeat and breathing to the point where her rifle barely moved when she fired. College seemed like an impossible dream for the Martinez family until Sarah's shooting talents opened doors that academic achievements never could. The University of Texas offered her a full scholarship to join their rifle team, and, for the first time in her life, Sarah found herself part of a group that understood her passion for precision shooting. She studied criminal justice, thinking she might become a police officer or perhaps work for the FBI, but deep down she knew that civilian law enforcement would never offer the challenges she craved. It was during her junior year that the military recruiters found her. Staff Sergeant Michael Chen from the Marine Corps watched Sarah compete at a national collegiate championship and knew immediately that he was looking at something special. The way she adapted to different conditions, adjusted for wind and elevation, and maintained her accuracy under pressure was unlike anything he had seen in 20 years of military service. The conversation with Sergeant Chen took place at a coffee shop near campus, far from the noise of the shooting range. He didn't offer her a standard recruitment pitch about serving her country or seeing the world. Instead, he spoke about precision, about the kind of shooting that could save lives and end conflicts with surgical accuracy. He told her about missions where a single well-placed shot could prevent larger battles, about the responsibility and burden that came with that kind of power. Sarah listened without interrupting, her coffee growing cold as Chen described a world where her skills would matter on a scale she had never imagined. He talked about advanced training, about weapons systems that cost more than most people's houses, about the mental discipline required to make life and death decisions in fractions of seconds. When he finished speaking, Sarah asked only one question: when can I start? The decision to join the Marines wasn't just about the shooting, though that was certainly part of it. Sarah had grown up watching her parents struggle to make ends meet, working jobs that wore them down without offering much hope for the future. The military represented something different, a chance to use her unique talents in service of something larger than herself, and the financial security that would allow her to help her family. Her parents' reaction was exactly what she had expected. Miguel was terrified at the thought of his daughter in combat, while Elena was proud but worried about the dangers her daughter would face. Her brothers, who had always been slightly intimidated by their sister's unusual abilities, offered their support while secretly relieved that they wouldn't be expected to follow in her footsteps. The final semester of college passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Sarah maintained her training regimen while finishing her degree, but her mind was already focused on what lay ahead. She read everything she could find about military snipers, studying the techniques and equipment used by the world's elite marksmen. She learned about ghillie suits and range estimation, about ballistics and environmental factors that could affect a bullet's trajectory over long distances. The day Sarah signed her enlistment papers, she weighed exactly 140 pounds and could hit a target the size of a quarter at 300 yards under ideal conditions. What she didn't know was that the Marines would push her far beyond anything she had previously considered possible, both physically and mentally. The young woman who had grown up shooting rabbits in the Texas scrubland was about to enter a world where the targets would shoot back, where a missed shot could cost lives, and where the weight of taking a human life would test every assumption she had about herself and her abilities. But, on that spring day in Austin, as she shook hands with Sergeant Chan and officially committed to 4 years of military service, Sarah Martinez was simply a 21-year-old college student with an exceptional talent and a desire to do something meaningful with her life. She had no way of knowing that within 5 years, she would be considered one of the deadliest snipers in military history, or that her precision with a rifle would save hundreds of lives while taking dozens of others. The transformation from civilian marksman to military sniper was about to begin, and it would change not just how Sarah saw the world, but how the world would come to see her. In the years ahead, she would learn that there was a vast difference between hitting targets made of paper and metal, and taking aim at human beings who had families, dreams, and fears of their own. She would discover that true precision wasn't just about accuracy, it was about living with the consequences of that accuracy for the rest of your life. The humid Georgia air hit Sarah like a wall when she stepped off the bus at Marine Corps Recruit Depot, Paris Island. It was 4:30 in the morning, and the sun wouldn't rise for another 2 hours, but the temperature was already climbing toward what would be a scorching summer day. Around her, 47 other recruits stumbled through their first moments of Marine Corps life, most of them looking as disoriented and overwhelmed as she felt. Drill instructor Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Williams made his first impression by screaming instructions that seemed designed more to confuse than clarify. His voice cut through the morning air like a knife, demanding immediate compliance with orders that the recruits barely had time to process. Sarah found herself swept along in a tide of controlled chaos, her civilian clothes replaced with ill-fitting utilities, her long black hair disappearing under a regulation cover that felt foreign against her scalp. The first weeks of boot camp were a systematic destruction of everything Sarah thought she knew about herself. The physical training was brutal, but manageable years of competitive shooting had given her a level of fitness that served her well. What challenged her was the complete loss of individuality, the way the Marine Corps methodically stripped away her sense of self and rebuilt her as part of something larger. Williams had singled her out early, not because she struggled with the training but because she excelled at it. During the initial rifle training, while other recruits fumbled with their weapons and missed targets at close range, Sarah consistently scored expert marks. Her natural shooting ability made her stand out in a way that attracted both positive attention from instructors and resentment from some of her fellow recruits. The rifle range at Paris Island was unlike anything Sarah had experienced in civilian shooting. The targets were human-shaped silhouettes placed at distances up to 500 yards, and the training emphasized not just accuracy but speed and adaptability. Recruits were expected to engage multiple targets under time pressure, adjust for varying wind conditions, and maintain their accuracy while wearing full combat gear and carrying heavy packs. Sarah thrived in this environment. While other recruits struggled to adapt their civilian shooting experience to military standards, she seemed to instinctively understand what the instructors wanted. Her scores were consistently among the highest in her platoon, earning her the respect of the drill instructors and the unofficial role of helping train her fellow recruits. It was during the final phase of boot camp that Sarah first heard about the Scout Sniper program. Master Sergeant Patricia Lopez, a veteran of 3 combat deployments, had come to observe the recruit training and notice Sarah's exceptional performance. Lopez was a compact woman with graying hair and eyes that seemed to evaluate everything she saw. She watched Sarah shoot for an entire afternoon, noting not just her accuracy but her patience, her ability to remain motionless for extended periods, and the way she adapted to changing conditions without losing focus. The conversation that would change Sarah's life took place behind the rifle range, away from the other recruits. Lopez didn't waste time with pleasantries or elaborate explanations. She told Sarah that she had been watching her shoot and that her skills were beyond what the regular infantry would fully utilize. The Scout Sniper program was looking for exceptional marksmen who could handle the physical and mental demands of operating alone or in small teams, often deep behind enemy lines. Lopez explained that Scout Sniper School was voluntary and that many Marines who attempted the training failed to complete it. The course was 13 weeks of the most demanding military training available, combining advanced marksmanship with survival skills, camouflage techniques, and the mental preparation necessary to engage human targets at extreme distances. Only about 30% of Marines who began the training successfully completed it. Sarah didn't hesitate before accepting the opportunity. The regular Marine infantry training, while challenging, had never pushed her to her limits. She wanted to discover what she was truly capable of, to test her skills against the most demanding standards the military could offer. Lopez warned her that Scout Sniper training would change her in ways that she couldn't anticipate, but Sarah was confident that she could handle whatever challenges lay ahead. The weeks following her graduation from boot camp were spent in additional infantry training, where Sarah learned the skills that every Marine was expected to master. She excelled at navigation and small unit tactics, earning her the informal leadership position within her training group. Her fellow Marines had come to rely on her calm demeanor under pressure and her ability to solve problems quickly and efficiently. But, even as Sarah mastered the standard Marine skills, her mind was focused on the sniper training that awaited her. She spent her free time studying ballistics tables and environmental factors that affected long-range shooting. She practiced estimating distances and reading wind patterns, skills that would be crucial in the advanced training ahead. The letter confirming her acceptance into Scout Sniper School arrived on a Tuesday morning in November, 3 weeks before she was scheduled to begin the program. Sarah read it twice, her heart racing with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She had achieved something that most Marines never had the opportunity to attempt, but she also understood that acceptance was only the beginning. The real challenge lay ahead. Her final phone call home before beginning sniper school was brief and emotional. Elena had followed her daughter's military career with a mixture of pride and concern, and the news that Sarah was entering even more specialized and dangerous training weighed heavily on her. Miguel simply told his daughter that he was proud of her and that she should trust her instincts, advice that would prove more important than either of them realized at the time. Scout Sniper School began before dawn on a cold December morning at Marine Corps Base Quantico. Sarah arrived with 11 other Marines, all of whom had distinguished themselves during their initial training. They represented the best marksmen from recruit classes across the country, and the competition between them was immediately apparent. The first instructor Sarah met was Chief Warrant Officer James Rodriguez, a 20-year veteran who had completed multiple combat deployments and was widely regarded as one of the finest snipers in the Marine Corps. Rodriguez was a small man with weathered features and hands that never seemed to stop moving, constantly adjusting equipment or checking wind conditions. He looked at the assembled students with an expression that suggested he already knew which ones would fail. Rodriguez's opening address was both inspiring and terrifying. He explained that they were about to learn skills that could save American lives and end conflicts through precise application of force. But he also warned them that becoming a sniper meant accepting a burden that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. Every shot they took in combat would be a conscious decision to end a human life, and that responsibility would test their character in ways that normal infantry combat never could. The first weeks of training focused on advanced marksmanship techniques that pushed even Sarah's exceptional abilities. Students learned to engage targets at distances exceeding 1,000 yards, adjusting for elevation, wind speed, temperature, and humidity. They practiced shooting from unconventional positions, through small openings in walls or vegetation, and while wearing ghillie suits that limited their movement and vision. Sarah discovered that her civilian shooting experience, while valuable, had prepared her for only a small portion of what military snipers were expected to master. She learned to use sophisticated optical equipment that could gather and transmit intelligence about enemy positions and movements. She studied human behavior and psychology, learning to predict how targets would move and react under different circumstances. The physical demands of the training were unlike anything Sarah had previously experienced. Students spent days crawling through swamps and forests, moving undetected across terrain while carrying heavy equipment. They learned to construct hiding positions that could conceal them for hours or days, and to remain motionless for extended periods while observing enemy positions. But it was the mental training that proved most challenging. Sarah learned to calculate precise firing solutions under extreme time pressure, factoring in dozens of variables that could affect a bullet's trajectory. She practiced engaging multiple targets in sequence, making split-second decisions about which threats posed the greatest danger to friendly forces. The training culminated in a series of field exercises that tested every skill the students had learned. Sarah found herself alone in the Virginia woods for 3 days, stalking instructors who knew she was coming and were actively trying to detect her position. She successfully completed her assigned shots while remaining undetected, earning the highest scores in her class and the respect of instructors who had initially doubted whether a woman could handle the physical demands of sniper training. Graduation from Scout Sniper School was both a triumph and a sobering moment. Sarah had achieved something that fewer than 2,000 Marines in the entire Corps could claim, but she also understood that her real education was just beginning. The training had given her the technical skills and mental preparation necessary to serve as a sniper, but only combat experience would teach her what it truly meant to use those skills against human targets. As she prepared for her first deployment, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her from the shooting ranges of Texas to the elite ranks of Marine snipers. She had pushed herself beyond what she had thought possible and earned recognition as one of the most promising snipers in the Corps. But deep down, she knew that the real test of her abilities and her character lay ahead, in the combat zones where precision shooting meant the difference between life and death for herself and her fellow Marines. The transport helicopter descended through the Afghan dawn like a metal bird seeking shelter from the approaching storm. Sarah pressed her face against the small porthole, watching the landscape below transform from barren mountains to the sprawling collection of mud brick buildings that comprised Forward Operating Base Wolverine. Her stomach churned from a combination of turbulence and nervous anticipation as she prepared for her first combat deployment as a Marine sniper. 3 months of specialized training at Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton had prepared her for this moment, but nothing could truly simulate the weight of knowing that in a matter of hours, she might be required to take a human life. The M40A5 sniper rifle secured beside her represented years of training and thousands of rounds fired at paper targets, but today it would serve its true purpose for the first time. Staff Sergeant Michael Chen, the same recruiter who had first approached Sarah in college, was now her team leader and spotter. Chen had completed 2 previous deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq, and his presence provided some comfort as Sarah adjusted to the reality of combat operations. He had spent the flight briefing her on the tactical situation in their area of operations, describing the enemy forces they would likely encounter and the rules of engagement that governed when and how they could use deadly force. Forward Operating Base Wolverine was located in Helmand Province, one of the most contested regions in Afghanistan. The base housed approximately 800 Marines and soldiers from various units, all working to deny Taliban forces the ability to operate freely in the area. Sarah's sniper team was attached to 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, and their mission was to provide overwatch for infantry patrols and eliminate high-value targets when the opportunity arose. The base itself was a study in controlled chaos. Blast barriers and razor wire surrounded the perimeter, while inside the compound, Marines moved with the purposeful efficiency of people who understood that every day brought the possibility of combat. Sarah was assigned to a small plywood hut that she shared with 2 other female Marines, a radio operator and a combat engineer who had arrived the previous week. Her first night at Wolverine was sleepless. The constant noise of generators and vehicle movement was punctuated by the occasional distant sound of gunfire from the surrounding area. Sarah lay on her narrow cot, her rifle within arm's reach, trying to process the reality that she was finally in a combat zone where her training would be put to the ultimate test. The briefing the next morning was conducted by Major Patricia Harrison, the battalion intelligence officer who would be coordinating Sarah's missions. Harrison was a tall woman with prematurely gray hair and the kind of intense focus that comes from analyzing enemy patterns and predicting their movements. She explained that Taliban forces in the area had been increasingly active, conducting attacks against coalition forces and intimidating local civilians who cooperated with the government. Sarah's first mission came sooner than expected. Intelligence reports indicated that a Taliban commander named Ahmad Mansour was planning to meet with local fighters in a compound approximately 2 kilometers from the base. Mansour was responsible for coordinating attacks against coalition forces and had been linked to several improvised explosive device incidents that had killed American soldiers. The mission briefing took place in a dimly lit command post filled with maps and communication equipment. Chen explained that they would insert by helicopter before dawn and establish a hide position overlooking the target compound. If Mansour appeared and could be positively identified, Sarah would have authorization to engage. The shot would need to be precise, as intelligence indicated that civilians, including women and children, might be present in the area. Sarah spent the hours before the mission checking and rechecking her equipment. The M40A5 rifle had been zeroed at the base's small shooting range, and she had calculated firing solutions for various distances and environmental conditions. Chen would serve as her spotter, using high-powered optics to identify targets and provide corrections for wind and other factors that might affect her shot. The helicopter insertion took place in complete darkness, with Sarah and Chen wearing night vision goggles as they moved quickly across rocky terrain to their predetermined position. They established their hide in a cluster of boulders that provided concealment while offering clear fields of fire toward the target compound. The position was approximately 650 yards from the building where Mansour was expected to meet with his subordinates. As the sun rose over the Afghan landscape, Sarah felt the familiar calm that had always preceded her best shooting performances. Her breathing was controlled and steady, her heart rate had dropped to its normal resting level, and her hands were rock steady on the rifle. Chen lay beside her, scanning the target area through his spotting scope and maintaining radio contact with the command post. The first sign of activity at the compound came at 7:30 in the morning. Several men emerged from the building and began posting security around the perimeter. Chen identified them through his scope as typical Taliban fighters, armed with AK-47 rifles and dressed in traditional Afghan clothing. They moved with the casual confidence of people who believed themselves safe from observation. At 8:15, a truck arrived at the compound carrying 4 additional men. Chen studied them carefully through his scope, comparing their appearance to photographs of known Taliban leaders that he carried in his equipment. When the third man emerged from the truck, Chen's voice became tense with excitement. The man matched the physical description and facial features of Ahmad Mansour, the target they had been sent to eliminate. Chen's confirmation that they had positively identified their target triggered a series of radio communications with the command post. Major Harrison's voice crackled through their earpieces, confirming that they had authorization to engage if they could do so without risking civilian casualties. Sarah adjusted her scope and settled into her final firing position, her crosshairs centered on the man who intelligence had identified as responsible for killing American soldiers. Mansour was approximately 40 years old, with a full black beard and the weathered features of someone who had spent most of his life outdoors. Through her scope, Sarah could see him gesturing to the other men as he spoke, apparently giving instructions or sharing information about upcoming operations. He was completely unaware that he was being watched by American forces, or that his life was now measured in seconds rather than years. Chen provided a final wind reading and confirmed the range to target. Sarah's breathing slowed to the point where her rifle barely moved as she prepared to fire. The moment stretched endlessly as she made the final mental calculations and confirmed that no civilians were visible in her target area. When she pulled the trigger, the rifle recoiled against her shoulder with familiar authority, and the .308 caliber bullet began its brief journey across the Afghan landscape. The bullet struck Mansour in the center of his chest, killing him instantly. Through her scope, Sarah watched him collapse to the ground as the other Taliban fighters scrambled for cover, completely confused about where the shot had originated. The entire sequence from trigger pull to impact had taken less than 2 seconds, but, for Sarah, it felt like a lifetime. Chen immediately began coordinating their extraction as Taliban fighters searched frantically for the source of the gunfire. Sarah mechanically worked the bolt of her rifle and chambered another round, though no additional targets presented themselves. The precision of the shot had been perfect, exactly what her training had prepared her to deliver, but the reality of having taken a human life was unlike anything she had experienced before. The helicopter extraction took place without incident, and Sarah found herself back at Forward Operating Base Wolverine within 2 hours of taking her first life in combat. The post-mission briefing was routine, with Major Harrison confirming that the target had been eliminated and congratulating Sarah on a successful operation. Chen praised her composure under pressure and the accuracy of her shot, noting that it had been executed exactly as taught in sniper school. But, that night, lying on her cot in the small plywood hut, Sarah found that sleep came with difficulty. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Mansour's face through her rifle scope in the moments before she pulled the trigger. She remembered the way he had gestured to his companions, completely unaware that he was being watched by someone who was about to end his life. The intellectual knowledge that Mansour had been responsible for killing American soldiers provided some comfort, but it didn't completely eliminate the weight of what she had done. Sarah had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, transforming herself from someone who had trained to kill into someone who had actually taken a human life. The technical aspects of the shot had been flawless, but the emotional impact was something that no amount of training could have fully prepared her for. Chen found her sitting outside their hut at 3 a.m, staring up at the stars that shone with unusual clarity in the clear Afghan sky. He didn't say anything at first, understanding that Sarah was processing an experience that every combat veteran remembered with crystal clarity. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet and understanding. He told Sarah that her first kill was always the most difficult, not because subsequent ones became easy but because the first one forced you to confront who you really were when everything was stripped away. Chen had taken his first life during his initial deployment to Iraq, and he still remembered every detail of that moment years later. The burden never completely disappeared, but it became manageable as you learned to focus on the lives your actions saved rather than the ones you took. Sarah listened without responding, appreciating Chen's honesty about the emotional cost of their profession. She understood intellectually that her shot had likely saved American lives by eliminating a Taliban commander who was actively planning attacks against coalition forces. But she also recognized that she would carry the memory of that moment for the rest of her life, and that each subsequent mission would add to that burden. Over the following weeks, Sarah completed several more missions, each one building her reputation as one of the most effective snipers in the battalion. Her shots were consistently accurate and well-timed, eliminating threats while minimizing the risk to friendly forces. She learned to compartmentalize the emotional impact of her actions, focusing on the tactical requirements of each situation while filing away the human cost for later processing. But, even as Sarah established herself as a highly effective combat sniper, she never forgot the weight of that first trigger pull or the face of the man whose life she had ended. Ahmad Mansour became the first entry in a mental catalog that would grow with each deployment, each mission, and each precisely placed bullet. The young woman who had grown up shooting rabbits in Texas had become something else entirely, and there would be no returning to the innocent world she had left behind. By her third deployment, Sarah Martinez had earned a reputation that preceded her arrival at any forward operating base. The young woman from Texas had accumulated 43 confirmed kills across Iraq and Afghanistan, making her one of the most effective snipers in the entire Marine Corps. Her precision was legendary among infantry units who had operated with her support, and enemy forces had learned to fear the invisible threat that could reach them from impossible distances. But reputation came with its own burden. Sarah found that other Marines looked at her differently now, with a mixture of respect and unease that made casual relationships difficult. They saw her as a weapon first and a person second, someone whose primary value lay in her ability to eliminate human targets with surgical precision. The easy camaraderie that had defined her early military experience had been replaced by a professional distance that left her feeling isolated even when surrounded by fellow Marines. Forward Operating Base Chapman in eastern Afghanistan would be the setting for Sarah's most challenging deployment yet. The base was located in a valley surrounded by mountains that provided perfect cover for Taliban fighters who had grown increasingly sophisticated in their tactics and equipment. Intelligence reports indicated that foreign fighters, possibly including former military personnel from other countries, had joined local Taliban forces and were training them in advanced combat techniques. Major Robert Sterling, the new battalion commander, was a career infantry officer who had built his reputation leading Marines in some of the most difficult combat operations of the previous decade. Sterling was a compact man with graying temples and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of his surroundings.
He had specifically requested Sarah's assignment to his unit after reviewing reports of her previous combat performance.
The briefing room at Chapman was larger than those Sarah had experienced on previous deployments, reflecting the increased scope and complexity of operations in the area. Sterling explained that Taliban forces had established a sophisticated network of hidden positions in the surrounding mountains, using them to launch attacks against coalition convoys and to coordinate with terror cells operating in nearby Pakistan. Sarah's new spotter was Corporal David Kim, a 24-year-old Marine from California who had completed 2 previous deployments and earned recognition for his ability to read environmental conditions and predict target behavior. Kim was tall and lean, with the kind of intense focus that came from understanding that a spotter's calculations could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Their first major operation at Chapman involved supporting a company-sized patrol that intelligence believed would encounter significant enemy resistance. Sarah and Kim established their position on a ridgeline approximately 1,200 yards from the route the patrol would follow, with clear fields of fire covering several potential ambush sites. The distance was at the outer edge of her effective range, requiring precise calculations for bullet drop and environmental factors. The patrol had been moving for approximately 2 hours when Kim spotted movement in a cluster of rocks that provided ideal concealment for an ambush. Through his spotting scope, he identified 3 Taliban fighters armed with rocket-propelled grenades, positioned to attack the Marine patrol as it passed through a narrow valley below. The range to target was 1,247 yards, and crosswinds were gusting unpredictably through the mountain terrain. Kim's calculations accounted for elevation, wind speed and direction, temperature, and humidity as he provided Sarah with the firing solution. The first target was a bearded man in his 30s who was preparing to fire an RPG at the lead vehicle in the Marine convoy. Sarah's crosshairs settled on his chest as she controlled her breathing and prepared to engage. The shot was perfect, dropping the RPG gunner instantly and alerting his companions to the presence of American snipers. The second Taliban fighter attempted to relocate to a more protected position, but Sarah's follow-up shot caught him as he moved between rocks. The third fighter abandoned his position entirely, disappearing into the mountainous terrain before she could engage him. Kim confirmed both kills through his spotting scope and immediately began scanning for additional threats. The Marine patrol below had heard the distant sound of rifle fire and increased their pace, understanding that sniper support was eliminating threats ahead of their position. Radio chatter confirmed that no American forces had been injured during the engagement, meaning that Sarah's intervention had likely saved lives. But, as Sarah worked the bolt of her rifle and prepared for potential follow-up shots, she found herself thinking about the men she had just killed rather than celebrating the tactical success of the mission. Through her scope, she had seen their faces clearly, watched them prepare their weapons with the same professional focus that she brought to her own duties. They had been enemy combatants planning to attack American forces, but they had also been human beings with families and motivations that she would never understand. The mental catalog that Sarah maintained of her confirmed kills had evolved from simple numbers into detailed memories that included faces, locations, and circumstances. Ahmad Mansour from her first deployment was still the most vivid, but 42 other entries had joined him in the private space where Sarah stored the human cost of her profession. Each kill had been justified tactically and legally, but the cumulative weight was becoming increasingly difficult to bear. Back at Chapman, Sarah's reputation continued to grow among the Marines she supported. Infantry platoons specifically requested her overwatch for their most dangerous missions, knowing that her presence dramatically increased their chances of returning safely. But Sarah began to notice changes in how she was treated during routine interactions around the base. Conversations would stop when she entered the dining facility, not because other Marines disliked her but because they didn't know how to relate to someone who had killed more people than many infantry squads combined. She was respected and even revered, but also isolated by the very skills that made her so valuable in combat. The easy friendships that had characterized her early military career seemed impossible now that she carried the weight of so many lives. The mission that would define Sarah's third deployment came during her final month at Chapman. Intelligence had identified a Taliban commander named Hakim Ahmadi who was coordinating attacks against coalition forces throughout the region. Ahmadi was reportedly meeting with subordinates at a compound in a village approximately 15 kilometers from the base, and satellite imagery had confirmed significant enemy activity in the area. The operation would be the largest Sarah had participated in, involving multiple Marine units and helicopter support. Her role was to establish overwatch on a mountainside overlooking the target village, providing sniper support for the assault force while eliminating any high-value targets that presented themselves. The expected range to targets was between 800 and 1,400 yards, well within her capabilities but requiring careful planning due to the complex terrain. Sarah and Kim inserted by helicopter in the pre-dawn darkness, carrying enough supplies to remain in position for up to 3 days if the operation extended longer than planned. They established their hide in a collection of boulders that provided excellent concealment while offering multiple firing positions covering different areas of the village below. As the sun rose over the Afghan mountains, Sarah could see the target compound clearly through her rifle scope. The building was larger than typical village structures, with thick walls and few windows that would provide limited visibility for anyone inside. Intelligence had indicated that Ahmadi typically met with his subordinates in an open courtyard behind the main building and in the sterile corridors of the Pentagon, where powersuits and star-studded shoulders navigate the maze of national security. A single question would shatter the comfortable distance between war and its warriors. When Marine General Patricia Hawkins made what he thought was a casual joke about kill counts over dinner, he expected nervous laughter, maybe an awkward silence. What he got instead was a woman who didn't just remember numbers, she remembered names, faces, and the exact moment each life ended under her scope. Colonel Sarah Martinez had spent 15 years as one of the military's most decorated snipers, but no medal could capture the weight she carried in her memory. While others counted victories, she counted souls. And, on this particular evening, surrounded by the military elite who had never felt the recoil of a rifle meant to take a life, she was about to remind them all that behind every statistic was a human story, including her own. This is the story of a woman who transformed from a small-town dreamer into one of the deadliest marksmen in military history, and how a single moment of truth would force everyone around her to confront the real cost of the wars they commanded from behind desks. It's a story about precision, sacrifice, and the haunting clarity that comes when someone mistakes your pain for a punchline.